Welcome back this week. We are transitioning in our social theories week to talk about ageism. So we've been hinting at it a bit with some of the theories that we've gone over and some of the precursors to ageism. And I also underscored the fact that that ageism is really one of the major social theories that we will be using in this class to talk about aging and the aging experience and some of the challenges we face as gerontology specialists, as well as future older adults or current older adults. So what I wanted to do for this intro to ageism basically is to go over the introduction of this Chair Rocks and Aging Manifesto and just get a sense of a few of the things about ageism that the author is talking about. Okay, so one of the first things that she introduces in the book is just talking about how she becomes aware of ageism and how she at first experiences it herself, and will be taking a little test, online test next week, an implicit association test, to sort of see what kind of age stereotypes and prejudices that we have as well. So she really talks about the fact that she has this awakening period where she realizes her own fear of aging, that as she gets closer and as she compares herself to a gentleman at work, Ray, who she sees very much as stereotypically old, she starts to have this fear of getting there, of being seen like him. In a lot of ways, she uses her scientific knowledge or observation to gather information about this. What is real about aging? I think that's one of the things that I want us to focus in on in this class, is we have to really figure out what is real about aging and what's sort of this perception of aging, or this overlay of ageism on top of aging, that creates a lot of myths and stereotypes, but also just misinformation about what actual aging experiences are. She talks about the stages of her awareness, and one of the first stages is questioning her own assumptions, and this we need to be doing consistently in this class, is how much of what we're digesting from both the public and from quote-unquote reputable sources is actual truth with a capital T. The underlying truth is this is actually an aging experience versus this is what we think of as aging. It's really tainted a lot by ageism. Some of her assumptions, of course, were that the vast majority of older Americans are sick, frail, everyone gets Alzheimer's, that sex is done when you're old, or that it gets really bad, or that everybody has sexual dysfunction, that everyone's depressed when you're an older adult. Why wouldn't you be? These are all sort of assumptions that a lot of people carry around, these myths and stereotypes. So what she had done was she had started interviewing all of these older adult and older adult workers, in particular people who were had prominent work lives. And in these interviews, she came to realize that these myths aren't true, and started digging into the actual scholarly information about aging, and found things like the vast majority of older Americans live independently until they die. So this dependent sickness, frailness is really just a very small minority of aging individuals, but everyone is scared of it and thinks that that's what aging is like. So again, we have to tease out what's the reality of aging behind this facade that ageism has put on a lot of our conceptions of aging. Also, all older people are depressed. One of her assumptions, one of most people's assumptions, when we think about older adults, and we think they're all lonely and isolated and depressed, when actually it's just a minority of older adults that experience depression similar to other age groups. And the fact that we see this U curve of happiness, and happiness actually is highest when we're youngest, dips in our middle years, and then tends to get higher again the older we get, though it does tend to plateau somewhat in the later 80s and 90s. It's still higher than most middle-aged young adult people. As someone in my mid-30s to late 30s, I can attest to this, that I hope that happiness continues to plunge upward. But these are all things that are busting myths about how older adults are, and these are the ageist messages that we get, is that we're sick and frail and depressed, right? So that was her first stage, was she started to question her own assumptions based on both these experiences she was having with the interviews, but also we're looking for actual data, right? So then she said, right, so she sort of then transitioned into a different phase of awareness, which was a successful aging phase. She also called this the age denial phase, which is very common for a lot of people. So I don't want to be like these things or these myths tell me I am going to be old and sick and frail and all these things. So I'm going to chase successful aging. I'm going to be the best, the super geezer, right? And that's an actual term, a quote unquote, right? That people have, is that the people who are beating age, who are age denying, are the ones who are really doing it right. The super active, the very athletic, the robustly healthy, all of those sort of people who are, a couple of echelons above everybody else who's aging. Those people are really the ones doing it right. And that would actually be somewhat of a level of ageism as well, right? Because we're denying that age is a relevant experience at all different levels of activity. So she started to see aging as something to stave off, as something to deny, as something that she could quote unquote beat, right? But there's still a lot of stereotypes and prejudice underlying this, as we see age as something to get away from, instead of embracing the different aspects of aging, and even things like the selective optimization and compensation theory, where the woman who was the artist and it was the painter in her interviews did, right? So there are some things that she couldn't do as she continued to age, but instead of trying to beat the odds or trying to lose some of these limitations, she was selective. She was selecting goals for herself within the realm of art and painting that she could optimize her best effort and then compensate for some of the limitations. So we get these things a lot, that sort of age denial phase, from a very youth-centric society, right? So we should be like. So instead of, it's bad to be old, it's only good to be old if you're like you were when you were young. So you can see the sort of the still stereotypical prejudicial ideas about that, right? So as long as you're like you were when you were young, being old is okay. Whereas we would like to shift from being old is okay, right? And the third stage is somewhat like this, right? So the third stage she talks about is that, heck, I'm not Ray. There are all forms of aging realities that are valid, and every one of them can be quote unquote successful. I don't have to act as if I'm young in order to be a successful older adult. I am a successful older adult just by virtue of the fact that I can embrace it, and I have goals at whatever level they are, and I'm continuing to have well-being in my life. So it's not just what she calls the sporty variant, right, or the super geezers who are being successful at aging. You are old, I am old, and we probably all of us have different conceptions of what that might be and have different levels of ability, but all of those experiences are valid. So we're trying to get people to the stage 3 point of awareness, where it says, no, you don't have to be a super geezer to be okay, or old, but acting just like you were when you were young. That's not the valid experience of aging. Aging is so many different experiences, all of them being valid and none of them being unsuccessful per se, but each one having its own challenges. So that was her journey of awareness, to become aware of actual ageism and how it was infiltrating her different experiences, as well as kind of creating a different reality for her. So why are we so off about aging as a society? Why do we think it's A, B, and C when in fact it's not any of those, or it doesn't have to be, or those are sort of unrealistic and false goals to be chasing? Well, the main answer here is ageism. We have viewed, again, aging as a bad thing, and if you act old or are perceived to be old, that's something that's not okay. So we're so off about aging in those respects because we see it as something bad and negative, and we have stereotypical ideas about it that lead to our own prejudices against older people who act like older people, right? It's been called the last socially sanctioned prejudice, right? So we'll talk more about this next week when we get into definitions and theories and different data that upholds some of the things that we've been talking about. But the idea is that just like racism and sexism, ageism is an ism, but it's the last one that's still okay, that we still laugh about, and that's still acceptable. It's socially constructed, so ageism and the fact that being old is equated with bad is a construction of our society. It isn't a reality, right? It's just perceived to be that way, therefore it is, and it's socially upheld. And a lot of it is about group dynamics. We see this all the time in social psychology, in other arenas, in-group and out-group behavior, right? So it goes back to social psychological, the foundations of social psychology and every ism that we have out there. The dominant group, which in this case is younger groups, they have created an in-group and therefore need an out-group to be able to dominate, silence, exploit, to keep their own power and privilege, right? So anybody outside of that group or outside of that box is discriminated against, and that's how we get ageism as well. It's the younger groups who have created these ideas, or even the middle-aged group, that somehow the older age group are outside that privileged box that we have of the people who are okay and the good ones, right? So again, being old is bad unless you're old looks like you're young. So the young would be the in-group there. And there are a lot of things that are important to note about this. Like she talks about language use and how we refer to people and how we talk about groups and their experiences shapes this social construction of ageism. So she talks about her preferred language to talk about older people, and she calls them olders versus youngers. So olders and youngers are her terms that she's hoping are are value neutral. But a lot of sort of correct or politically correct way to refer to older people is older adults. We don't much like elderly. We certainly don't like oldsters and all of the different sort of labels that we can think of that we give older adults, like senile, that have very negative connotations. But language is a very important part of sustaining ageism. So sort of empowering ourselves and the people that we work with to use age prideful language like older adult. So what can we do? And this is really a lot about what the This Chair Rocks book is going to be about. It's going to be about increasing our awareness of different areas. So step one, waking up to it. The book is going to help increase our knowledge of what actual aging experiences are in some of these domains, like our physical health and bodies, our brains, our sexual functioning, all of those things, sort of busting myths and waking up to what our assumptions were, and realizing that there are many different realities, and that looking through, the scientific and reputable data to say this is what aging actually is for people. So when you're more aware of it, then it's time to make your plan for what you can do about it and make some changes. So this is the sort of pattern of the book. We'll talk about what it is, and we'll sort of wake ourselves up to ageism in each of these sort of different areas. But we'll also talk about how we can institute changes in some of these areas, and what changes have been made that are positive, and then make that change. And this is really, too, what your final project will be like. You'll have a topic, you'll describe it and help people wake up to the fact that it's a challenge, and that, our conception of it in society has been challenged, has created this challenge, and this is what it is, and here is your plan to help make a change in that area. All right, so this is our foray into ageism. Next week, we're going to talk much more about it, and we'll go over some studies, as well as the chapter in your book on ageism, the This Chair Rocks book. And don't forget to keep up on your reflections and all the little assignments and things that are in your modules for the week. And I'll be seeing you next week.